August 12, 1940. 10 miles southeast of Ventnor on the Isle of Wight. High above the shimmering blue of the English Channel, the morning air is brittle and cold. A flight of 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109 ES, led by an experienced Oberleutnant from Jägerschwader 26, banks toward the white cliffs of the English coast. They are the hunters, veterans of the Spanish Civil War and the Blitzkrieg through France, scanning the horizon for the first sign of British resistance. Suddenly, a glint of sunlight off an elliptical wing reveals the presence of their nemesis. 8 Supermarine Spitfire Mark is climbing at full throttle through the German formation. The sky erupts into a chaotic tapestry of white vapor trails and tracer fire. The German pilots immediately haul their sticks back, using the strong climb of their Daimler-Benz DB601 engines to regain altitude advantage. To an observer on the ground, the Spitfire looks like a graceful avian predator, while the Messerschmitt appears as a lean, angular machine of pure utility. As the engagement tightens, one Bf 109 pilot attempts to shake a Spitfire by pulling into a sharp, high-G turn. It is a fatal mistake. The Spitfire, with its lower wing loading and generous surface area, carves a tighter arc, its 8 Browning machine guns spitting a combined 160 rounds per second into the path of the German fighter. Pieces of the Messerschmitt's fuselage tear away as the pilot desperately shoves the nose down, relying on his fuel-injected engine to maintain power in a negative G dive where the Spitfire's carbureted Merlin would surely sputter and stall. This tactical dance, the Germans' vertical prowess against the Britons' horizontal agility, would help define the summer of 1940. While the Luftwaffe entered the battle with technological and numerical confidence, they were about to realize that the Spitfire was not just another interceptor. It was a masterpiece of aerodynamic engineering designed specifically to blunt their air superiority. To understand why the Spitfire could outmaneuver the Messerschmitt, one must look at the fundamental design philosophy that separated these two machines. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E was born from a requirement for a lightweight, high-speed interceptor, characterized by a narrow-track landing gear and a small, high-loading wing optimized for speed and climb. In contrast, the Supermarine Spitfire was the brainchild of Reginald Mitchell, who envisioned a fighter that could turn with grace without losing energy. The heart of this agility lay in its elliptical wing, a complex piece of engineering that minimized induced drag and allowed for a much lower wing loading of roughly 24 pounds per square foot, compared to about 30 to 32 pounds per square foot on the Messerschmitt. This meant that at any given speed, the Spitfire could pull more G-forces and sustain a tighter radius than its opponent before the airflow began to break away and cause a stall. However, the Battle of Britain was not won on wing shape alone. It was a clash of two very different power plants. The Spitfire's Rolls-Royce Merlin III engine, a 12-cylinder masterpiece, produced around 1,030 horsepower in early combat ratings, and significantly more once 100-octane fuel and higher boost were fully exploited, giving the Spitfire a top speed in the mid-360 mph range. The German Daimler-Benz DB601, on the other hand, featured a mechanical direct fuel injection system. This technical distinction became a life-or-death factor in the skies over Kent and Sussex. When a Spitfire pilot pushed the nose down into a sudden dive, the negative G could momentarily starve the Merlin's flow chamber carburetor of fuel, causing the engine to cough or cut out entirely. German pilots, aware of this weakness, would often split S, flipping their aircraft over and diving away, knowing the Spitfire could hesitate for those few critical seconds. Yet, if the fight stayed level or turned into a climbing contest at typical Battle of Britain altitudes, the Merlin's smooth power delivery and the Spitfire's superior handling often tilted the scales back toward the British. This technological parity meant that the outcome of an engagement frequently came down to the tactical environment. While the Messerschmitt was arguably the better energy fighter, capable of diving from high altitude to strike and then zooming back up to safety, the Spitfire was the ultimate dogfighter. If a German pilot allowed himself to be drawn into a horizontal turning circle, he was at a serious disadvantage. The Spitfire could simply stay inside the Messerschmitt's turn, bringing its sights onto the target while the German pilot struggled against the increasingly heavy controls of the 109, which became notoriously difficult to maneuver at high speeds. This struggle for control was reaching a breaking point as the Luftwaffe shifted its focus from coastal radar stations to the heart of the Royal Air Force's inland airfields. By late August 1940, the The battle entered its most critical phase as the Luftwaffe shifted its weight toward the sector stations of 11 Group, the front line of Britain's defense. This shift placed the Spitfire and the Messerschmitt in a relentless war of attrition. At the center of this clash was the issue of endurance and tactical positioning. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E, despite its formidable speed and climb, was hampered by a limited internal fuel capacity of about 88 US gallons, which translated into a short combat radius over southern England. Operating from bases in northern France, German pilots often found themselves with only minutes, on the order of 10 to 20, of safe combat time over British territory before fuel considerations forced them to break off and head back across the Channel. The Spitfire, operating from its own home turf, had no such restriction. British pilots could loiter near their airfields, climb to intercept, and engage for as long as fuel and ammunition allowed. This home field advantage was amplified by the Dowding system, the world's first integrated air defense network. Using chain-home radar stations and a centralized command and control grid, the RAF could direct Spitfires and Hurricanes to the approximate altitude and location of incoming German raids, reducing the chances of being bounced from above. Instead of being caught on the ground, Spitfire squadrons were often already at 20,000 feet, waiting in the sun. When the two fighters met, the Messerschmitt pilot had to contend with the physical toll of his aircraft's design. At high speeds, the 109's trim system and heavy ailerons required significant physical strength to move, making the aircraft feel stiff. The Spitfire's controls remained comparatively light and responsive, allowing a pilot to snap the aircraft into a defensive role or an offensive bank with a flick of the wrist. Even the armament of the two fighters reflected different combat philosophies. The Messerschmitt was a heavy hitter, typically armed with two 7.92mm machine guns on the cowl and two 20mm MGFF cannons in the wings. While the cannons were devastating when they hit, they had a relatively slow rate of fire and a lower muzzle velocity, making it harder to lead a fast-moving target like a Spitfire. The Spitfire Mark I countered with 8.303 Browning machine guns. While lacking the explosive power of German shells, these guns provided a shotgun effect, a dense, concentrated cone of lead that could shred the cooling systems or control cables of a Messerschmitt in a 3-second burst. As the air battles intensified over London in September, these technical nuances began to influence the survival rates of the men in the cockpits. The human cost of these technological differences became most apparent during the massive daylight raids of mid-September 1940. While the Spitfire was often tasked with engaging the high-altitude escort fighters, it frequently found itself diving through the Zerstorer and bomber streams to reach the Messerschmitts. The cockpit of the Spitfire, though cramped, still offered reasonably good visibility for its era, especially to the sides and above, even if rearward vision was far from perfect. The Bf 109ES heavily framed, angular canopy and higher cockpit sides made checking directly behind more awkward, and in a dogfight where seeing the other man first could decide life or death, any advantage in situational awareness mattered. This visibility, combined with the aircraft's inherent stability as a gun platform, allowed RAF pilots to maintain tight formations and react quickly to sudden, violent bounces initiated by German Jagdflieger. The Messerschmitt pilots, however, were far from defenseless. They had perfected the finger four formation, a loose, flexible tactical arrangement that allowed pairs of aircraft to cover each other. When a Spitfire attacked one 109, another was often positioned to dive onto the Spitfire's tail. This tactical sophistication forced the RAF to evolve. The rigid Vic formations used by the British early in the battle were gradually abandoned in favor of more flexible, German-inspired setups. Yet, even with improved tactics, the 109 pilots faced an invisible enemy: psychological and physical fatigue. Because the Messerschmitt was demanding to fly at the edge of its performance envelope, and because every mission involved a flight over the sea with a strict fuel clock ticking down, German pilots arrived over the combat zone already under immense stress. A Spitfire pilot, by contrast, could be in the air and engaging the enemy within minutes of leaving the grass at Biggin Hill or Kenley, his mind focused entirely on the deflection shot in his reflector sight. By the time the sun began to set on September 15th, the day now celebrated as Battle of Britain Day, the technical and geographical factors shaping the duel between Spitfire and Messerschmitt had reached a tipping point. The Luftwaffe lost on the order of 60 aircraft in a single day, and the realization was sinking in among the German high command that the English fighter could not be swept from the sky. The Spitfire's ability to outturn the 109 in the horizontal plane had turned many Luftwaffe escort missions into nightmares of defensive circling. While the Messerschmitt was a lethal weapon of aggression, the Spitfire had proven to be an exceptionally effective weapon of denial. It did not need to destroy every German bomber. It only needed to survive long enough to strip away the Messerschmitt escorts and leave the bombers vulnerable. This shift in the air war's momentum was beginning to signal the end of Hitler's plans for a cross-channel invasion. The shift in the Luftwaffe's strategy toward night bombing and the eventual postponement of Operation Sea Lion did not mean the rivalry between these two titans was over, but rather that the Spitfire had secured its place as a primary instrument of British survival. While the Messerschmitt Bf 109E was a masterful realization of the energy fighting concept, its reliance on vertical tactics was often neutralized by the Spitfire's ability to force a horizontal engagement where its elliptical wing was king. The Spitfire's relatively low stall speed allowed its pilots to fly slower, tighter circles that the German machines struggled to match without risking a stall. This aerodynamic edge was bolstered by the rapid refinement of the Merlin engine and the widespread introduction of 100-octane fuel, which allowed for higher boost pressures and greater power at exactly the altitudes where the Battle of Britain was fought. The Spitfire was more than just a sum of its specifications. It was a psychological shield for the nation, a machine that turned the sky over southern England into a defensive web that the Luftwaffe could not penetrate without unsustainable losses. Ultimately, the Spitfire's success against the Messerschmitt was the result of an industrial and design philosophy that prioritized pilot survivability and ease of handling alongside raw performance. Where the Bf 109 was an unforgiving aircraft that punished fatigue and error, the Spitfire was often described by its pilots as an extension of their own bodies, forgiving of all but the most egregious mistakes. This synergy between man and machine allowed the RAF to maintain a high operational tempo even as the pressure on 11 Group reached its zenith. The lessons learned in the summer of 1940 would lead to the development of the Mark V and the formidable Mark 9. Ensuring the Spitfire remained competitive as the Bf 109 evolved into the G and K variants. The Battle of Britain was the first major defeat for the German war machine, and it was the elliptical wing of the Spitfire that helped carve out that victory. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the technical and tactical battle for the skies over Britain, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more detailed historical analysis.